So last week we kind of walked through setting up the rest of the API project. I think the last thing we did was we added Mediator. We added some unit tests around that. We added some static code analysis. Over the weekend, Tommy Enrico added and submitted a couple of PRs for the Fluent validation. So I thought maybe we just take like 5 minutes and kind of walk through what he did there. So that was great. And then we can discuss what we want to focus on today. Do we want to focus on some more stuff around the API? Do we want to jump into the React side of things? We could do some other things like the build pipelines, or setting it up in Azure. Kind of wherever we want this to go. So before we jump into the Fluent stuff for a minute, what are you guys thinking for the rest of our time today? Anybody have like a strong opinion on something they'd want to add to this?
Seems like a good day to maybe start the React UI stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I can get behind that for sure. So I'm by no means an expert there. So some of you guys on the call may even have some more experience. So we can walk through it together and kind of figure things out and see which aspects of it we like and which that we don't. All right, so real quick, just to kind of go through what Tommy had done and just to briefly explain the validation. So he added the Fluent validation framework or library into the app and web projects within the API. And ultimately what that allows you to do is build out really nice rules for pretty much whatever you want in C#, but in this case we're going to do it off of our commands. So I won't spend a ton of time on this, but you can see that there's this create blog command validator. An abstract validator is the type that the Fluent validation gives you, and it's an abstract validator of T. So in this case, we're going to say a create blog command, which, if you don't remember, in this case just has an owner at this point in time. So Tommy went and added just a pretty simple rule for it that just says, hey, it can't be empty, so you have to actually pass it an owner. And you have to have a max length of 20. So this matches our database at the moment as well. You could also do some other interesting things here, like perhaps only a blog. An owner can only have one blog, so you could go check the database at this point as well, just by injecting into this constructor like the foxhound data, just like we did into the handlers. And then this will this is setting up the rules for that. And then he built a validation pipeline behavior. So if you remember the logging pipeline behavior where we said you can do things before and after the request through Mediator, that's where he added the validation to kick off. So this is pretty slick, and what it ultimately allows you to do is say, okay, I can inject any iValidator of tRequest. So in this case, we have a validator of a blog command, and that blog command is a request. So what this allows you to do is every time any of your Mediator commands or queries are called, if it finds a validator that matches that signature, it can go ahead and run the validations there. So what that's doing is saying, validate async. It's calling validate async on all of the validators that it finds, selecting all of the errors that it had. It's saying if there are any, so if there are any errors, throw a new validation exception, which is also in the Fluent validation type, passing it all of the validation failures. And then at that point, if it doesn't throw, it will actually go execute the handler. So pretty slick. I walked through that a little quickly maybe, but does anybody have any questions on that? Is it worth showing an example of that? I haven't tried that myself yet, but I'm sure we could, spin it up in the. I think we added Swagger to this, so we could see the actual messages coming back.
Sure. Hey John, I had a question. Not necessarily on this exactly, but so I always wondered, does it make more sense to validate the input? So like the create blog command versus validating the blog itself before it's saved to the database?
Yep.
The pros and cons. So the big pro of validating the blog itself is that you only have to manage those roles in one place. For example, like the one max length is 20.
Yep.
Right. So you only have to manage that as one place. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think like everything else, it depends, right?
Right.
The advantage here of doing it this way, you potentially when you're have some sort of complex command that might be dealing with multiple domain models, like say you're adding a blog and a post or something at the same time. By validating just the command, you're going to get errors just specific to that command. But your point's very well taken, right? Like your domain itself should also be validated at some point in time to make sure that everything there is working. So I think it kind of depends on the type of app that you're building.
Sure.
I've had pretty good success doing it at the command level, but then within the actual domain itself, say like we don't have much here, but say we had like an add post method, and then if something wasn't right there and the state of this couldn't work for whatever reason, I've also just thrown exceptions within here, and that's more like a fatal error that would happen, right?
Okay.
But yeah, I think your point stands. Like there's definitely multiple ways of handling that. I've also seen it handled on the model binding in ASP.NET Core too, right? You can another way of kind of validating all of the commands or anything passed to that. You could do it at that level. Between those two, though, I do prefer to kind of push it back a layer and have it in the app because it's kind of your validation is very much your domain logic. But it's a really good question. I'm curious if anybody else on the call has any thoughts there. It's kind of my opinion. All right. Well, if we were to go to here, and I believe if we were to try to create this, and I say try it out, and I pass it an empty owner, we should get some sort of 500 error back, perhaps. That actually created it. Huh. Well, let's see if we do something over 20 characters. So this one didn't work, but it does look like the string.empty made it through. So maybe it's something we have to tweak there. But interesting. We'll have to maybe look at that in a little bit more detail. But ultimately, now that this validator exists and the pipeline behavior exists, maybe it didn't get wired up. Let me look at that real quick. Now that's here as well. So this should be saying run this every time because it's registered within the startup class. Tommy, did you?
So I'll take another look at that. I'll debug it.
Yeah, see if I don't know if it was working for you locally. I just pulled it down this morning. So
I didn't try it with Swagger.
That's interesting. I mean, we can definitely take a closer look, but everything does appear on the surface to be working. So
okay,
we'll take another look. But any questions on that? Any questions on the validations or any other comments to Ryan's comment? All right. So at this point, why don't we go ahead and move into React? And like I said, I think this is going to be kind of like a bit of a group discussion to see how we want to go about handling some of this stuff. So let me spin up a new VS Code. VS Code's kind of my editor of choice for this. I think it does a lot better than Visual Studio from my experience in doing a lot of React. So a couple of things to discuss first, and this is I'd like some discussion around this is kind of the project structure about where we want to put our client app itself. In the past, what I've done, if we kind of come out to projects here and we were to look at this Foxhound and we have this Foxhound web, the one thing that has worked for me in the past is putting all of this API into an API folder and then creating a client folder within here, and then just kind of telling .NET to ignore the client folder, so then the API has no idea about the client folder that's there. And then we would open that client folder within VS Code. Has anybody done anything similar or had kind of differing opinion?
Joe, me and you have talked about this. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Oh no, I was just going to say I do know on the old .NET servers we generally had 2 directories and 2 shares created, one for an API, one for the UI for things like Angular.
Yep.
When we spun up the new .NET servers, we kind of just made that one application for SABS or Media Center or whatever. So I think we've moved to the API serving up the Angular or whatever it be and be all in one project. I still struggle sometimes to make build pipelines handle that properly, and that's just probably something I continue to work on with React and that. But yeah, I imagine you have it set up so pipelines as well would be able to build the React and then
that's right.
Put it in the appropriate area.
In .NET Core, the idea is anything that you can serve up out of the www root folder will be essentially static files that people can read from the server. Now there's pros and cons to that. Some of the routing kind of gets in the way a little bit from the API, so you kind of have to handle that to say, hey, if I don't find a route in my API, I'm really talking about the client. That's kind of been one little nuance that we had to write just a very simple piece of custom middleware to handle. Ryan, go ahead. I know you were starting to say something earlier too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, me and you have talked about this a little bit. I tend to so for stats, we actually had 2 different repos for the front end and the back end, which I wish we wouldn't have done. But other than that, I tend to like having a separate web or client folder at the same level as the solution.
So like here, you would have like a foxhound.client or something like that?
Yes. Maybe even one higher, or is this the highest?
This is kind of the highest level.
So probably at this level then. Something like that. So I would even maybe sometimes throw some of the back end stuff into another folder in this directory.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just kind of personal preference. But I just like to put them at the same level sometimes. Just kind of separates them out. One's client, one's back end.
Right, and to Tim's point with the build server, and we'll set that up eventually, is this really shouldn't matter. I mean, it does, but it shouldn't matter as far as deployment goes. You still have different deployment options, and you still have different build options. And we could still use the www root folder within .NET Core and just build everything and send it to there. Or we could do something completely different, like host them, on 2 separate URLs at the end of the day. It's kind of up to us. So kind of what I'm hearing is 2 options is we can kind of embed it within this web folder and kind of tell .NET to ignore it, or just try to put it outside of that into just some sort of client folder, which might be a little cleaner. I'm not as familiar with that approach, but we can certainly try that. Anybody have any other suggestions on that? Maybe Ryan, because I'm unfamiliar with that. Maybe we'll try that though. Maybe we'll learn something here. So you would kind of say have like a foxhound.client here. And then,
yeah, more or less, yeah, pretty much that. And
then build. We'll build it out within here.
Yep.
Okay, I can get behind that. We'll give that a try. And then the other piece that I think we need to decide is how we want to create the app. My only real experience with anything kind of significant is with Parcel Bundler, which is a library or a tool that more or less uses Webpack and a bunch of other things under the hood for a more or less zero configuration build of your React project. Create React app is also probably the more popular choice, but I'm not as familiar with Create React app. I've used it like once to create an app, but then haven't done a whole lot with it. So I guess I'm a little partial to the parcel bundler, but that's only because that's kind of just where my experience is. So again, kind of open it up to anybody of if they have an opinion there on which way we'd like to try this. If there's no opinion, I'll probably just go with the parcel bundler because that's what I'm familiar with. And I'd also like to use TypeScript as we go along. I'm a pretty big TypeScript fan. I think if you start a new project with it, it gives you a lot of benefits. If you have existing JavaScript projects, you can certainly convert them to TypeScript, but that refactor tends to be, I don't want to say an all or nothing, but it starts to become that eventually from some of the things that I've seen. I don't know if you guys are familiar with TypeScript. Is it worth going into the specifics on the differences between TypeScript and JavaScript, or is everyone pretty much aware of what those differences are?
Yeah, sorry, I've been on the phone and jumping around. I say just do away, and if it's not the right way or the wrong way or whatever, or it's a learning thing. So we do it one way, and maybe somebody wants to convert it over. I actually been for a little bit of practice, I've been converting the project over to F#. So just let people do. You want to do one way, we'll take a look at it, and then maybe we can build a second different app and try a different way.
I like it.
And just go from there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start this with Parcel Bundler though, because that's worked out relatively well for me.
So John,
Yep.
just a quick question. What's you probably already went over this, and if you did, I apologize. What's the difference between using Parcel Bundler versus create React app and npm package? Because that's typically what I've used. I've been doing Max's class on O'Reilly on how to just create React apps, and he just uses the create React app. Does that automatically use TypeScript rather than plain vanilla JavaScript? Or
I think in create React app you can kind of tell it when you spin it up whether you want to use TypeScript or not. Parcel is a little bit more. I want to say you have to do a little bit more, but it's you definitely kind of just create the files yourself and then just point Parcel Bundler at it, and it will just bundle up all of your resources. You can customize it a bit more than from what I've seen with Create React App. So I would say Create React App, without using it a whole lot, is more kind of you just follow whatever it tells you to do. And Parcel Bundler, you can kind of pick and choose the things that you would want a little bit more manually.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and because I personally had never used this, so yeah, if you want to go through it, I'd like to learn.
Okay. Certainly. So what I would do here is we created that folder, so all I'm going to do is just go into Foxhound and say this is the folder that I want to scope VS Code to. And we'll open a terminal, and maybe the best way to just get any kind of project started would just be npm init. Is it not npm init? Oh, yeah, okay. So it wants a package name, so we'll just call it foxhound.client for now. Version, that's fine. Description, TrainingApp. Entry point, we'll use index. Make sure we'll use index. Yeah, that's fine for now. Test command, I don't care. Git repo, I don't care. It'll pick all this up. Keywords, author. Yes. So now that just kind of built out a basic package.json for us. And what we'll do is add some. We'll add some dev dependencies first. So I think the first thing that we're going to want is Parcel Bundler itself. Can you guys see this okay?
Yep.
So I'm going to do npm I for install, and we're going to add a couple of things here. We'll add Parcel Bundler, and we'll also add TypeScript And then you can do, I think it's -D for save dev dependencies. So we'll go ahead and add this, and we should see our package JSON get updated with some dev dependencies. Let's give that a second to pull everything in. Is everybody familiar with NPM and the idea of package JSON, or is it worth going into any discussion deeper in that?
I think most are probably familiar, I imagine.
Yeah, I think everybody's probably seen this in one form or another. But if not, while it's installing, excuse me, NPM is very similar to NuGet, but for the client. So you can go to npmjs.org and browse all the, millions of packages that exist out there. This is taking a couple of minutes to pull everything in. So while this is installing, one of the other things that we can talk about is in extensions for VS Code. So one of the extensions that works pretty well is Prettier, which we'll set up as well. So anytime that you save your files, it will just clean up the document. So that's kind of nice. And then Git Lens is another nice one. So it'll help us see kind of who modified things within Git. And you can look at the history and everything within VS Code, which is pretty nice. So let's see what that did. So I must have messed up the -D command because it just put it in dependencies. So I'm just going to automatically change this to dev dependencies. I thought -D was it, but maybe you have to do --save dev. So let me save
I think
that.
it's uppercase D.
Is that what it was?
I believe so.
So now that we have that set up as our dev dependencies, I shouldn't have to do much. We'll rebuild everything in a little bit. One of the other things that we're going to need, so just kind of talking about Prettier there for a second, is it does require that you have a Prettier config file, even if it doesn't do anything at this point in time, but I am going to add that. So it's just .prettier, I think it's RC. And then this can just be an empty object. But if we wanted to customize Prettier, like we wanted the line lengths to be something, or we wanted trailing commas or something like that, this is the place that we could come set up our coding standards. So I'll also need to add Prettier as a dev dependency as well. So I should have done that at the same time, but we'll see if that command, if it's the -D. So it'll be Prettier -uppercase-D. We'll pull that in. Yep, so Ryan was right, it's a capital D. And then one of the other things that you can do within your preferences in settings is you can search for format, I think. So you have to come in here and check this format on save, and if you check that, it will find the Prettier RC and all of that, and it will clean up your document when you save, which is nice. So now that we kind of have the tooling in place, we need to actually add React into our package JSON as well. So what we're going to do there is just add a normal dependency for React. So I'm going to do npm install. I'm going to add a couple of things at the same time here. I'm going to do React. I'm going to do React DOM. So there's the idea of React DOM and like React Native. So React DOM is just what you're thinking of. It's the DOM for HTML, where React Native would be you can build native apps for like iPhones and Androids and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of any other dependencies we might need right now. Maybe we'll just leave it. We'll keep it simple for here. And since we're using TypeScript, I'm actually going to pull in the types for React and React DOM, which will be a dev dependency. So you can see here we have React and React DOM as the dependency. Does anybody know how to get VS Code to control scroll to zoom? Just want to zoom in a little bit.
Maybe try. Oh, you got it.
That's a little bit better for now, anyway. You guys see that okay on the other end?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then we will also add a couple other just dev dependencies, which is going to be at types, which is TypeScript typing files. So we'll do that for React, and we'll do that for React DOM as well. And those are just dev dependencies. So the idea between dependencies and dev dependencies, if you're unaware, is the dependencies, anytime we build our project, everything in dependencies is going to be bundled up as a dependency for that application to run. Where dev dependencies is anything on your machine that's needed to kind of support the project, but not necessarily run the project. So these things aren't going to be bundled into whatever gets bundled and deployed for your app. So I think that's enough to get started there. So let's start by creating just a simple source directory. So I kind of like to have within here just a source, it's called src, and within here is going to live all of our source code. So let's just start by adding, let's see if we can just get something very simple spun up. Maybe we'll add like an index HTML, and within here we'll add just a simple HTML file. HTML, what is it, like Lang, English, and we'll add a head tag. I have something over here. I'm just going to kind of copy and paste this so you don't have to watch me type all this out. So Prettier isn't kicking in yet. We'll have to take a look at that in a minute. And we'll give this a title. And then we'll give it a body. And what we'll do here is just give this an ID of root, and then we'll see that's where we're going to kind of inject our React app. And then we will create our first very simple React component. So I'm going to say new file here, and I'm just going to call it app.tsx. So if we were using not TypeScript, this would be JSX, and for TypeScript, they're TSX files. And we could talk about that a little bit more. But for now, what I think all we want to do is create a component within here. So we'll be using kind of the React functional component idea through this, using hooks. But if you start going out and researching some of this stuff, you'll see React up into probably mid-2019. I'm not exactly sure when hooks came out. It was all class-based. And I think class-based still has its place, but hooks is more of a functional way of developing React and React components, and that's been pretty popular these days.
16.8 was when hooks was introduced within React.
I want to say that was maybe like August or something of last year.
No, it was, I think it was. Oh, sorry. I was just saying. I think it was originally late 2018 was like the beta, but I think it went into general availability early 2019.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that though.
So we're potentially going on about a year or so. A lot of the trainings and stuff, if you guys have front-end masters accounts, there's some good training there. And I found a couple of plural sites as well that have they kind of compare and contrast like the class-based versus the hook functional way of doing that. But we'll be doing the functional way in here.
Yeah, there's a good video from ReactConf. I'll try to find a link and post it in the chat.
That's great. So let's go build our first first React component here. This is just going to be this basic app component until we get something a little bit more concrete. So one of the first things that you'll do kind of within any React component is you're going to say import React from React. So that's going to bring in all the bits that we need for React. And then since we're going to be using the React DOM here to render that out into that index HTML, we're also going to bring in React DOM from React DOM. So if you're wondering where these froms are coming from and where I'm getting IntelliSense, that's all coming out of node modules. And when we run that npm install, everything gets put into that node modules folder. And then from here, I'm just going to create a simple app function, which is going to be our component itself. So within any React functional component, you need a return that returns whatever whatever HTML or whatever components we want to render within here. So I am going to do just a div. What am I missing? I'm missing an arrow function here. And I'm just going to return something like hello from React for now. So you see when I save there how it kind of cleaned that up for me. If I undo, and then when I save, that's prettier kicking in and saying, hey, you don't need, I can make that a lot simpler for you. So that's kind of nice. And then what we're going to do at this point in time is this is where we're going to just have our entry point, and we're going to say React DOM.render, and we want to render this app component. And where do we want to put that? Where we're going to use document get element by ID, and we're going to say root. And what that's going to do is find this root and render our application within here. And maybe somebody knows here. So this is a functional component in and of itself, so we can actually type it that. So we can do React.functional component, or you can do FC for short. I'm not sure there's any difference in those.
There's not. You usually put that after the app, though.
Yes, sorry. Just syntax problem there. So we can do React.fc, or we could also import FC up here, and then you could just do FC. So kind of whatever you feel like doing. I think in this case, I kind of just prefer the React.fc. I think it's a little more explicit. But that's up to you. I would say, though, if you're building an app, on a team, kind of pick a convention and just try to stick with it. So then going back to our index.html, what we're going to ultimately do is we want to render here the script. The source is going to be that, which is our TSX file. So now we're kind of set up, but we haven't really built anything yet. So this is where the parcel bundler is going to come in. So I think that's all we need to just kind of get a very basic app down. One of the things that you might see is in here you can put something like, not rendered. So if your page renders and you get this not rendered, you know that React hasn't kicked in, and we actually haven't rendered our app.tsx. So any questions up into that point? And then the next thing we'll do is configure this for Parcel Bundler to build. One of the other things I'm going to do right off the bat here is just add a tsconfig. So this is just a way of telling, I'm going to paste some code in here, a way of telling TypeScript how to deal with some of the module loading and what languages we want to target. So we're going to target ES 2018, which gives us a lot of the newer JavaScript features within the last couple of years. And then we're saying for the JSX is specifically for React. So this is kind of like a one and done file. You generally won't touch this a whole lot. So then back in our package JSON file, we'll add a script. So I'm going to remove this test script for now because we're not going to do any testing right now, but we can come back and add this later. But what we'll do is maybe add a dev command or script here. And what we're going to do here is give it the command for parcel to kick in. So we're going to say parcel. The source that we want to build is going to be the index.html file. So it's just source/index.html. And that's pretty much all that's needed, I believe, for Parcel Bundler to pick up everything and compile our app. So if we come down here, we should now be able to run npm run dev. So npm run can run anything that you have in your scripts, and we just name this dev. So that's the magic there. So if we go ahead and run this, we'll see what we get. What it's going to ultimately end up building for us is this .cache folder and this .dist folder. And within here, you can see we have our index.html and this app some numbers.js. And what that does is builds and compiles everything that we need right into this JavaScript file, and this index HTML is just going to point to that JavaScript file for us. So any questions on that? If we were to open this JS, it's going to be, well, we haven't minified it here because we're in dev mode, but this is going to pull in, all of React and all of the any of the other files that we need. So in here somewhere we should see a hello world or hello from React, because it actually put our app component that we built, and it joined all of that into this app.js file for us. So the other thing that Parcel Bundler does is it's going to spin up the app on this port for us. So it's going to be localhost 1234. So if we go ahead and out here, we can see hello from React. So that all worked. If our app wasn't running, we would have saw that not rendered or something went wrong. It also has hot module loading, which is really nice. So if I come into here and I just say hello from React updated, and I save this, when I navigate back to here, it's automatically going to be updated. You don't have to come up here and refresh your page or anything like that. So if I kind of show those side by side, let me do that for a second. Updated again, and when I save, see how it just pops up over there. So that's pretty powerful. I believe Create React App does that. Pretty much any new modern build tools that you have are gonna handle that for you. And you can see it built this whole thing in 207 milliseconds. So that's kind of nice. So that is a very brief walkthrough of setting up a very basic React app with Parcel Bundler. Any questions or comments before we move on to whatever we want to build next? For those of you that have used Create React App, how do you think that compares to to the startup of spinning something up there?
Honestly, I thought that was a little more cumbersome.
Sure, I agree. I think the Create React App, you just do Create React App new or something, and it will build a number of that for you, right?
Yeah, and also where you have the React.fc, I mean, I guess I don't really understand why that's 100% necessary, because I didn't have to do that.
No, so that's TypeScript.
That's TypeScript.
That's TypeScript. Okay.
Yeah, and technically John could also put any, and it would be perfectly happy with it. It's just TypeScript, requires types. So.
Okay.
So I could leave this off, and the app is going to work just the same.
Right. TypeScript's going to default that to any.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying not to ask so many questions, because I'm sure that all you guys are extremely familiar with how to do all this stuff. I just don't want to interrupt your flow.
No, I think that's great. That's great.
I think the syntax is so that is the equivalent of a function. Or John could rewrite that as just he doesn't have to use the arrow function. But so that's just a function, right? So that React.fc is the return type of the function.
Okay, yeah.
So where this becomes a little bit more important later on is when you're building your own classes and your own interfaces and stuff within TypeScript. If you type everything, then you can get errors and warnings before runtime, right? That's one of JavaScript's I don't want to call it a weakness, but I will call it a weakness, is that you don't by default get any of that kind of static typing. So it's a lot of things at runtime that you might catch. The idea behind TypeScript is you can catch those at compile time and deal with it before it gets to runtime.
Right.
Okay.
It's basically static code analysis. So what's kind of going on here too, realize too, you have JSX in there. So the JSX itself is getting so there's a lot of layers of translation going on in here. So you got the TypeScript getting translated to the target language in that TS config, which was ES 2018 or 2016, whatever John put in there. And so that is what's the JavaScript that's getting outputted. There's also Parcel probably translating to JSX to so the JSX is getting, well, actually, TypeScript may be doing that too, since it's defined here. So that's getting translated to the React.create element functional calls. So
Yep. So like if we were to come out here again and kind of look at the thing that it built here, you could see, hey, I'm importing React. I've created. This is the JavaScript that's actually running, on the little server here, and then here, React.default.create element. So it's what React is really good at is manipulating that DOM, right? It keeps this idea of like a shadow DOM behind the scenes and can do really quick DOM manipulation for you. That's kind of its claim to fame. A lot of these front end frameworks, that's the claim to fame. Where if you've kind of contrast that, if you've done a lot of either vanilla JavaScript or a lot of jQuery code where you end up having to find the DOM elements and do all that manipulation yourself, that's more or less what React's just doing under the hood for you, but really much more efficient than most people can write.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So like this isn't necessarily a parcel bundler, create React app, or any of that. This is just a
So that's all just TypeScript.
just TypeScript, correct?
Okay. Yep, that makes sense.
All right, guys. So where do you want to move from here? Do we want to create maybe some sort of like blog component or something, and then try to wire that up to the API? Perhaps we're gonna have to deal with some CORS issues and some other things to get that to work, and then determine how we want to maybe call that with Axios or the Fetch API that's built in, something like that.
Sounds good.
Okay. So maybe what we'll do is create the idea of a blog on the front end. So we're going to I'll say kind of mirror it, just because our domain's pretty straightforward, but we're going to end up calling this get all blogs, and we're going to get this blog result back, which is going to have a blog ID, an owner, and a created date. Probably should also add a title or something in here at some point. But for now, we'll just add these three things, and we will try to build something that maybe iterates through all the blogs and like just shows them in a list. Just something pretty straightforward. And then depending on the time, maybe we can get some styling or something involved and look at like the material UI or something like that. So I'll kind of maybe do something like this so we can see both. So what I would do is probably just add another component within our source directory, and we can come back and we can structure this later, but for now we'll just kind of keep it pretty straightforward. So maybe we will call this just blog or blogs TSX for now, and very similar to how we did the first page, we're going to want to import React.
Hey, John, just a suggestion.
Sure.
There's an extension out there for React snippets, so you don't have to type this out every time.
Yeah, so I've seen that. I haven't used it though. Do you know a good one? Let's try that out.
Yeah, if you just type in like React, it should be like the first one. The second one.
This?
Yes.
the one I use is React code snippets, but I don't know if that one has TypeScript.
This one has 1.2 million views, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah, that's the one I typically use. I don't know.
Yeah, let's give it a try.
One, but and then if you just type in, or once that's installed, if you type in RAFCE, into the component, that'll generate the exact type of function style that you were doing.
Excellent. So now that we have that in there, I could do like RAFCE.
Yep.
Look at that. So it didn't give us all the TypeScript-y stuff around it, but that's definitely a really good start.
There's another extension. This one's kind of minor. I don't know if you'd like it, John, or maybe somebody in the group. It's called Bracket Pair Colorizer 2.
I have seen that one, yep.
And it's kind of nice because it just put lines, colors to lines for your second one's same author, but slightly newer. So
we'll give it a try. And if I don't like it, I'll turn it off.
Yeah, you can always.
So now we got all sorts of pretty colors in here. Nice. So that's great. So like when we ran that command, it looks like it was able to kind of decipher that, hey, this is blogs TSX, so I want the same function name. So the only thing that I will add here is just the react.fc to give it the TypeScript. So at this point, maybe I'm going to do a couple of things in the same file for now, but we can come back and again refactor this as we see needed. I'm going to create just an interface, and this is just TypeScript at work, and I'm just going to call this blog, and I'm going to define the things that the blog has. So in this case, it was a blog ID, which was a number. It had an owner that was a string, and it had a created date, which is a date. So this is just kind of defining our model here. So a couple of things we can do, maybe just until we go to the API, we can just define like a list of these. So I'm just gonna, within here, I guess I can do it outside of here. I'm gonna say const blogs example or something like that, and we're just gonna say this is going to be a blog array. So this is where TypeScript comes in handy again, is I can say that this is a new array, and within each one of these, see how I'm kind of getting some, let me see if I can format this a little bit better. See how I get the IntelliSense on this? And that's all TypeScript at work, saying, hey, I know this blog has a blog ID, owner, and a created date, so I have to give it those things. So I'm just going to say, okay, I have a blog ID of 1, a owner of John, and a created date of, how do you do date in Java? Just think that might work. And then see how there, that's, again, prettier kind of when I saved it, it just kind of made it all online. So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste, and we'll just create a few of these, and we'll say Tim has 1, Ryan has 1, and Kevin has 1. And we'll just kind of say 1, 2, 3, 4. And what we'll do at this point is maybe we'll just try to get those to spit out and render in a list on the screen for now. And we're going to talk about using, well, I guess we can come back to using state and some of the hooks within here in a minute. So what we want to do is just render those out to the screen. So there's really not a whole lot of magic going on to do that. One thing that you have to have is every one of your functional components has to return just one, I guess it's not just functional components, it's anything in React, has to return just one node. So in this case, if you had multiple things that are in there, you would want to wrap it all like in a div tag or whatever kind of tag you would want for that component. And then
there's also a thing called, I was just going to say, there's also a thing called fragments that if you don't want to wrap it in a div, it'll render multiple nodes. It's kind of a different way around it, but we don't really have to get into that, I guess.
No, fragments is, it's good. Maybe we come up with an example where we can dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, if you just understand what's going on under the hood with the JSX, it's being translated to React create element function calls, and so everything's still JavaScript there. So just understand you're returning. You need to fit what you can literally put on a return line. So it has to be an expression or fit into a single statement. So you want to, so if you think about it, if you have children that are side by side, like two divs, it's going to get translated to return react.createElement space react.createElement. And so that's invalid syntax, in JavaScript. So you have to wrap it in something. So you can just put it in a div, or you can put it in a fragment. If you're actually returning a JavaScript array, the later version of React is smart enough to kind of auto wrap it. So
that's a really good explanation. That's good. So maybe what we'll do with these blogs, we just have this blogs example for right now. We will we'll just make like an unordered list to keep it pretty simple. And then what we want to do is create an LI for every one of these blog examples. So this is where we can use just plain old JavaScript. So we can say what blog example dot map, and then what's our map function take it. We're gonna have a blog that comes out of that, and we can just use an arrow function, and we can say, I think we can just do li, and then within here we can say blog dot what am I missing? Blog dot owner, for example. We can just spit out the owner of that. And if I save that, oh, I didn't wire this up yet. So that essentially would go map all of our blog examples onto here. But notice over here how we don't have that yet because we didn't say that this blogs component is rendered anywhere. So let's go do that. So in our app, what we can do is we can import that. So I'll write it out, but we can say import blogs from, and then it's going to be blogs, what is it, /blogs. So that's one way of doing it. Another way that we could do it is just by rendering it here. So we could just say blogs and see how it will do the import for you. So that's the way I prefer, because then it's less thinking. So at this point, we're just rendering the blogs out, I think. But I'm not seeing that working. Anybody?
Yeah, John, because you just violated what we just explained.
Yes, that's a return. Yep.
Yes. So you could use you got a semicolon after the div
Yep,
too,
I got all
and you got our.
Yep.
So now would be a good point to do a fragment. There is a new shorthand that should work. I don't know if you know the new shorthand for fragment, John.
I don't, but maybe just hold that thought for a second. I definitely think we should do that. But let me just, I'm just going to say here, return blogs. And now you see how that's rendering. And exactly what I just violated exactly what Chris just said. If we wanted to return something a little bit more, we could do div. And then within there, maybe we have another div for the hello React app or hello from whatever. And then we can put blogs right below it. And that would give us both of those things. But yeah, we can definitely try the fragments here as well. Do you know the syntax for that?
Yeah. So the new shorthand is actually, if you just leave your bottom one there.
Okay.
Just delete the div.
Okay.
No. Just quite literally delete the word div, and then on the bottom leave the slash. Yep, and save that, and that should still work.
I did not know that.
So that is now the older way is to actually import fragment from React, and then you would have the word fragment in there.
You can actually just do React.fragment here as well.
Right. With the shorthand though, you don't have to do the import. So.
Well, I learned something new. That's great. That's great. Okay, so we'll leave it like this for now, and then but you can see that our blog entries are now kind of being output here. And if we wanted to make this a table or something a little bit more interesting, you could do blog.id, or you can kind of see how you can build out whatever you want that UI to look like.
Hey John, I don't know if maybe you just haven't got to this yet, but every element is part of a list that's being rendered needs a key.
Yep, that's a good point to come over here.
I just wasn't sure if you missed it or didn't get to it.
Yeah, I was going to chat about that. So let's do that now, because I think if we actually open our console here, we should see this warning. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop, right? So the dev tools are kind of your friend here for pretty much any front end framework, but React is no exception. So within here, this LI needs a key. And the idea of the key is something unique about whatever array that you're iterating. So I believe it's so it can do DOM manipulation much more efficient. So it knows if, we'll get into the state management in a second, but it'll know, hey, if that specific ID was changed or the specific blog entry was changed, to only go re-render that one. The way that we have it set up now, I believe that any time this blog examples array would be changed, it would re-render the entire thing. So for something like this, not too big of a deal, but if you start thinking about components nested within components, which is ultimately how you end up building your React app, and you don't want that to re-render all these components over and over and over again. Ryan or anyone else, do you have anything to add to that for the why key is important?
No, that's pretty much the explanation. So it allows React. So you want to make sure that key is kind of like a primary key, like it's a unique identifier for that row, because it is kind of working like
the index.
Yeah, so it is working like a primary key in essence. So it allows React to recognize that that row has not changed.
So what I'm going to do here for this key is I'm just going to say key is the blog ID, because right now they're unique, and that's probably going to be unique once we pull it back from the will be unique once we pull it back from the API. So once I do that and we come back over to our dev tools again, you can see everything else is okay. I don't have I'll add the React dev tools at some point as well. I guess I don't have them installed on this machine. So that is kind of just very basic React components. Probably about the simplest React component you'll see. So another thing that we could do here is maybe what we'll do, instead of having this LI every time, we could create. There's a couple different routes we can take here. We could kind of convert this into another component that's just a blog component, and we can see how we can render another component within blogs that renders blog, and we can pass props to that. I think that might be a good first step. And then what we can do is add some sort of button here that'll add another blog, and we can see how it'll render automatically on the screen for us. Any opinion on which order we do that in?
No, I was actually going to suggest that.
Okay. So if I do want a component called blog, I might want to rename this. Anybody have any suggestions? I'm just going to call this like blog model or something for now. We can come back and refactor this as needed. But what I'm going to do is create a new file called blog.tsx. What was that? RAFCE? That's nice. So blog is going to be a React functional component as well. And here, we're going to kind of refactor this out to be our blog. So I'm going to copy this, and I think I'm actually going to leave the LI here, but I'm just going to kind of move this into here. There's a couple of different ways that we could handle this, but one of the main things that I wanted to get to was just kind of the idea of passing props around. So what we want to do is ultimately in here be able to render our blog owner and blog ID. So we're not doing that here. So here it's not that big of a deal, but you can envision if we had some nice UI around this or something like that, this could get rather large. So kind of the general idea in a lot of these front-end frameworks, and again React is no different, is to kind of make your smallest lower level building block components that you kind of comprise and compose your app of. So what I want to do is pass in properties to this. So what I want to do is pass in props, but being in TypeScript, we want to strongly type this so we know exactly what it is that we're passing in. So a common pattern that you'll see here is defining something just called iProps within here. So I'm just going to create an interface within here, and I'm going to just call this iProps. And what do we want to pass in? Well, I could pass in the string of owner and the int or the number of blog ID, but for this I'm just going to pass in the entire blog. So here I'm going to say blog, and I want that to be of type blog model, and it should be able to find that.
Hey John, can I ask another stupid question?
Yeah, no problem.
So an interface in React, is that like different from like an interface in C#, or is an interface just basically a model?
Same idea as in C# for the most part, but it's not necessarily a React thing at this point. It's just strictly TypeScript. So Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so it's the same interface that you have experience with in Angular.
Okay.
So it is TypeScript. So if you want to look more into that on the TypeScript side, that's where you can go. But just realize, I was going to say it's not a React thing. So,
but React does give us this functional component, and it does give us this nice generic, where it says a functional component of T, which I can now say iProps. So that is enough to understand props here. Is this iProps, and it knows it's going to have this blog thing. So why am I not seeing blog model? And that's because I need to export this interface. So I can say export interface, and now it should give me the IntelliSense. I thought it might have. It's not going to. But what you can do is import blog model from blogs. And now it knows what that blog model is. Now in reality, I'd probably have another file over here, and maybe we'll go do that at some point. But for now, I'm just defining that here. So the idea here between export and export default, again, this isn't necessarily a React thing, but a JavaScript ES6 thing, is when I do export default blogs, when I do an import, it's just import blogs from that, right? Because that's the default. Anything else that I export from this file, like export interface here, you can do it within the braces, and that's how that would work.
Yeah, so it's called named exports, imports versus unnamed exports. So when you say export default blog, it's actually not it's like that is the default export, which means if you import that, it's just going to import whatever you specify.
I can call that whatever I want as well.
Right. So wherever John's importing that, he doesn't necessarily have to call that blog. Now, since it's a React component, it must start with a capital letter when he uses it within JSX. But like the difference with the named one, the stuff in the brackets, that specifically, like you have to call it by name because that's so you're only allowed one default export in a file, but you're allowed multiple named exports. Does that make sense? And they can be in the same file. So.
Yep. Any other questions on that? That's a good overview of just some ES6 syntax.
Yeah, I'm still trying to learn all this stuff, so I'm probably going to be asking more and more questions.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that's good. So like if I wanted to import that here, I can do blogs, comma, blog model, right? And that's how I would get blog model in here. But this blogs I could also call, John and put John here, and it should render as well. So now that in our blog component, we've just passed in the props, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. I can do, I'll start by this. I can do props.blog.owner and props.blog.blogid. And then over here now, instead of doing that, so if I save this, you'll realize nothing is rendered over here. But now I should be able to just say blog, and it's going to do the import. You can see up here on line 2, it imported it. And it's going to say, hey, you got to have the blog property. And that's how you pass this. You can just do blog equals blog, which is just this here. And see how that re-rendered back? And just to prove that, I can also maybe come in here and add the props.blog.created date. It's probably going to render real goofy. Or not at all. Render collection.
I think you have a circular import.
Why? Because this is calling
Because they're
that.
importing each other.
I think it can do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought Parcel was smart enough to.
Yeah, I think it is. However, the created date is not like in whatever I'm doing there. So this is actually a good.
Oh, it doesn't know. It doesn't know how to render dates. That's the problem.
I think you're right. I think
you have to convert it to a string or
to
something.
string it. But what I was going to say is, like, say I came into that problem and I wanted to see that this blog that the props got passed in here, what exactly that was. So I am going to spend just a minute to get the React Dev components, because that's pretty powerful. So I'm just going to come over here, come to the web store, and React Developer Tools. And we have this at work as well. So I'm going to add this extension.
Yeah, and is everybody clear on the props, like what they are? Like, so every React component, so if you think of an HTML element, right, you have attributes. So basically, in React, when you create a React component, it's basically like an HTML element. And so you can add whatever attributes you would like to that React element. And so then those attributes get passed down to props. And actually, John doesn't need to call it props. He can actually name that variable whatever he wants. That is just like convention that is called props, but that is the official name.
Yeah, no, I do understand that. I've been taking Max's class on React, so like that stuff does make sense to me.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody else does. So,
yeah.
But and then
I feel like I'm the lowest common denominator here. So if I understand it, you guys probably all do as well.
So now that I've added the dev tools, I can come over to this components, which is pretty nice, and see all these blogs that are here. When I click on it, I can see the props that were passed into it, right? I have a blog ID, a created date, an owner. So here, I can see my created date. I can make sure that I got everything in there. And if I come look at blogs, well, that's not part of the actual, I don't have that entire array as part of the component, so you don't see it here. But each blog gets the appropriate blog, so you can come see all the properties that are on there. So that's really nice for debugging. Sometimes you're trying to figure out, like, hey, am I getting this? What's the value? Why is that value null? Especially when you start messing with some async API calls and things like that. Make sense? The other thing we could do here is sometimes it's annoying to do props.blog.owner and I just want to do blog. You can, I think they call it destructuring in ES6. So I could say const blog equals props. And what that's going to do is pull the blog variable out into a kind of a local variable here called blog and pulling it out of the props. So here that same idea works.
Yeah, you could even destructure that even more into two separate variables if you wanted to, just owner and blog
Yeah,
ID.
I could do owner and blog ID as well here, and I believe it will traverse the whole tree.
And in general, that's what when you start using hooks, you will use destructuring, array destructuring. So there's object destructuring and array destructuring.
It actually doesn't let me do that, Chris.
Because you got to put props.blog.
Oh, sure.
No.
I got it. Yep, over here.
The other thing you could do with that is the same thing is if you left the blog in the braces, you could just do a colon and then open new braces and then do owner blog ID.
So owner colon.
No. So it would be blog colon braces owner comma blog ID. It would be the same thing.
Oh, okay. Yep. I think I would need to do that here as well, right?
Well, it would just be it would be blog colon braces, and then just yes. Yeah.
And we can see that works as well. So you have some options there. For this example, I think I'm just going to do blog and then just do blog.owner. Blog.blog.
And that's a good example of, in React, John's doing TypeScript with Parcel. This is one of the things with React is it's very unopinionated how you do stuff. So like there's lots of ways of writing stuff and writing things. Because everything is just JavaScript in the end.
Yep.
So it's not as rigid as like Angular or something where you have to, do things certain ways.
Now, I would say if you're going to be on a team, working here, or even as an organization, we may want some ground rules or something that we want to try to follow. Would be, try to create some conventions and just stick to it. Whatever that convention is, it's better to stick with the same convention than just use multiple different approaches.
Right, and bear in mind too that like the style, like the level of JavaScript you use can also have slight effects, like whether you're using arrow functions or non-arrow functions, and what your target is. So just be mindful of that too.
Right.
So.
I would say this day and age, like if you just use the arrow functions. I can't think of a good reason not to. You kind of get a lot of stuff for free, like the scoping and everything. Especially in modern React apps.
Yep.
Okay, so at this point, let's see, how are we doing on time? We got 45 minutes. Let's maybe create like a simple button to like add another blog to this blog model, and then we can introduce the idea of state into here. So let's see, how's the best way to do it? Maybe we'll use like the set state or use state hook, because that's probably one of the simplest ones, and one that you'll probably use all the time. So within React, we have some other imports that we can have. So I'm just going to import it here. You can say there's use state, there's use ref, there's use callback, use context. There's a bunch of different things here, but for state is probably the simplest one. And what we're going to do is create a const, and we'll call this, we'll call it blogs, and set blogs. And this is going to be use state. And since we're in TypeScript, we're going to type what we want that to be. So this is going to be a blog model array. And then anytime you use state, you want to give it a default. So in this case, we can give it an empty array, but maybe we'll pass it this blog example in a second. So what this is doing is saying, I'm creating a variable called blogs, which is of type blog model array, and set blogs, which is a way to change the state of the variable, change the value of the variable. One thing that you don't want to do, and this is kind of a functional programming paradigm, is you don't want to just say blogs equals, blog example or something like that. You always want to go through the setter for whatever state you're maintaining. Another kind of thing with use state is you always want to do that at the beginning of the file here. You never want to do that within any kind of condition or any kind of switch statement or something like that. You always have to define those up front. And anybody have anything to add to that? Oh, that's kind of key.
Yeah, and you can call use state multiple times. It's a little different from like when and that is actually the best practice. Is you want to because the behavior is a little bit different than how the old class-based state worked. So class state based, when you would modify it, you would call set state on it, and it would alter the state object, so it would merge changes in. So this is a little different in that you're essentially making a getter and a setter for the particular piece of data that you want to maintain. So it does a complete wipe and a complete creation. So if you make a very large object to maintain state, then you have to basically pass that entire or recreate that entire object when you set it again using the hook. So you want to so it's best to keep your object smaller and use state multiple times and make multiple getters and setters than to do one big one like you would do in a class-based component. So.
Yep.
The only other thing I would add is kind of non-Reacty definition of this is just these are just variables you're defining that React knows about. If you define a variable without use state, if you were to update it, React wouldn't re-render the DOM, and so you wouldn't see that change on the screen.
That's a really good differentiation. Like this blogs example, if I were to go just add something else to this blogs example, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll just create like a simple button and click, click it, and I'll add something to this blogs example, and you'll see that nothing gets added here. Maybe we'll do that real quick. So let's just kind of create a, I don't know, like a button within here. So button, we'll say on click, and we're going to pass it a function. And this will be, add blog. So here, just to make sure that renders, so I'll get an add blog button here. And then we'll create just a handler for this. So just on, let's call it add blog. And say I created a new blog. So this would be, new blog as a blog model. Owner is Chris, and the created date is new date. And then if I were to take that and just say blogs example.push new blog, and then down here just wire up to say call new. What am I missing there? I need to give that an event, I think. I shouldn't have to.
No, on click is recognized by yeah. You can either pass it that, or you can just add blog would work. I think.
Screwed up something. So just to kind of prove that we're here, I can do console log, and we can see what the blog example was, and then after I push it, we can see what blog example was. So too many buttons. So over here, I'll click add blog, and the first time it's all of these, and the second time, why did it render that ahead of time? I think the log just caught up. But anyway, like, you get the idea. Like, I am adding that to here, but React is unaware of it. It's not being rendered here at all, right? I can refresh this page, whatever. Click add. I can click it a million times. I'm not going to get any, React is unaware of that. So that's, to Ryan's point, that's where this use state comes in. We're going to create variables that React is aware of that it can re-render the DOM.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is functional components first. So the reason you had class-based components before is functional components could not hold state. So that's why hooks is kind of a big deal, because it's not 100% yet, but it basically gets you away from class-based components. And if you watch that conference video that I posted the link to, they kind of explain why. They're, to get back to functions, the advantages of functions over classes. But
I think I can just do like math.random here or something. Hopefully we don't get any collisions. Okay, so what we want to do now is use this blogs instead. So if I come here and just for example, we were using blogs example.map, and say I just say blogs.map, because now I have this local variable that is a blog model array. When I save that, I'm not going to get anything here, right? And I can keep adding blogs, nothing's going to happen because I'm adding it to this blogs example. But here, because I added just an empty array for my initial state, I could just as easily say blogs example here, and when I save this, I'm going to get these back, right? So my initial state of blogs is going to be this blogs example. Now, even now when I add blog, it's still not going to work because we need to call set blogs to add our new blog model, in which case then we can see the DOM re-render. So instead of doing blogs example.push, the syntax for this is maybe a little goofy, but what we're going to end up calling is something like set blogs Oh, I clicked the wrong button. And it won't let me switch back. Come on. Sorry about that. I can call set blogs, and what do I want to do? Well, I need to pass that an array, but I still want all the original blogs to be in there. So that's where I can use the spread operator and just say blogs. And then I can say in this array, I also want the new blog. So now if I did all that right, I'm going to get rid of these console.logs. When I click add blog, we're going to get Chris with a random ID. And then since we called set blogs, which ultimately is going to update our blogs variable is the thing being mapped to the UI here. When I click add blog, I should see, oh great, it's a good number. And I can see every time I click this, the DOM is being updated. So does that make sense? Especially for those of you that are new at that, there's a, you can go watch a lot of videos on people explaining use state. But I can try to, do that better.
One thing I just wanted to add is that technically this works, but it's actually possible not to. Set blogs to reference the previous state. You shouldn't actually reference the blogs variable directly. You should create an arrow function that takes the previous blogs.
That's a good point. So I'll call this.
With the way set state works, it's actually not guaranteed to give you the correct previous blogs, and then you can still spread that. So if you have to reference the previous state, you have to do it in this manner. Is the correct, the true correct way. It's the way John did it works, but it is prone. It could create an error in an edge case.
It's basically asynchronous programming. So because remind you, this is in an event handler on click. So the speed, if John were to rapidly start clicking the button, it's possible that by the time the one call made it, the other one hadn't completed. So and they may not get responded to in order. So that's why basically you kind of wrap it together into its own little thing. So like Ryan said.
So I think I could do something like, I don't know, if I multiplied that, maybe it'll give me an integer. Not that that matters. I don't think I have that right anyway. For it.
Yeah, it's probably less important here, but more important if you had an AJAX call executing, where you would have a delay, and
especially if multiple of those calls get kicked off or something like that.
Yep.
So you can see here, and maybe what we'll do. Going to probably run out of time, but what we could do is call our API to get the blogs back. So our blogs example kind of goes away, and we're going to have the idea of an initial call, which we can use a nice function, a nice hook here called useEffect, which is definitely a discussion that we're going to want to get into. Can we think of a way to use useEffect here that would make sense? I guess I could put the blog examples in there and kind of simulate the API call. Maybe we'll do that. So the other kind of very useful and very common hook within React is useEffect. So useEffect, oh, that's nice. Is that's that snippets thing that you put in here. I also need to import useEffect. There we go. useEffect, what it will do is run. So I'm going to kind of just clean this up for a minute. what useEffect will do is it will run one time when your function is created and mounted, and it will then run again for any variables that you have in here. So if I wanted to have whatever function we run here run maybe every time blogs is updated, I could put blogs here and it would run that effect. So, and then there's a return function which would do any kind of cleanup work when your component is kind of being unmounted or being destroyed. So the purpose of kind of doing that would be maybe you have an AJAX call or some sort of API happening in useEffect, but then that component gets destroyed. You may want to cancel that API call. Or if you've set a timer or something in there, like a set timeout, you may want to destroy that timeout so it's not just hanging out there and continuing to run.
Yeah, useEffect is a terrible name, in my opinion.
It is.
But it's really use side effect. So anything that happens in your component that would cause a side effect. So is the way I kind of remember it. So it's anything like, this changes, so I need this to happen, kind of thing. So
so let's maybe see it in action, and then we can talk about it a little bit more. So instead of here, the initial state, now this would probably be the best way to do it in this kind of example, but say we just wanted to put that back to an empty array. So when I save this, I'm not going to get any, things here. But when I add blog, it's still gonna, come add them. But say, our API call, that's kind of what we're going to simulate. So what we can do here is, pretend we were going out to the API, but I could just call set blogs, and here I can just say blogs example. So now when I save that, notice how that ran one time in here, and then I can, continue to add my blog. But let's try to do another. You can have multiple use effects as well. So I think that's something that I was when I first got started in here, I was kind of unaware of. But say every time blogs changes, I want to just log something to the console. I know that's a bad example, but I use this effect. And let's go out and take a look at this. So we can see in the console here, it says I use this effect. And that got called already because this always runs once when the component mounts. Now every time I click add blog again, I use this effect. I use this effect. I use this effect. You can see that it keeps executing that. That's because in here we've put blogs as one of the parameters to here. So this is an area where, like, if you don't specify the parameters, you can kind of get yourself into trouble, especially if you were using, say, blogs within here for whatever reason. You would then see that maybe either it's not firing, or if you put variables in here that you didn't want to happen, it would be firing too many times. So maybe like a good example here would just be to kind of like log out the blogs itself. So then here you can see the first time it has that, the second time it has another one, third time has another one. So that is a very brief intro into the idea of useEffect. But what we will do eventually is we'll call our API from useEffect here. And that will be our, we'll get rid of this blogs example. We'll actually just go get it from the API itself. Any questions up until this point? So for those of you that have done some like Angular or Vue or something like that, and maybe you're a little bit newer to React, like, what's your kind of initial thoughts on some of this stuff?
I know. I thought the way that JSX is used, I was taking training was all doing it in JavaScript, but the way JSX looks like HTML, but then is converted into JavaScript was interesting to me.
Okay.
And then just thinking from a more JavaScript based frame set in terms of things like ngIf or NG4 and just how it's just a more JavaScript look at it, and
Right,
that's how it's going to be handling all that stuff.
React doesn't really have the idea of like directives and
Sure, yep.
things like that. Yeah, that's definitely a bit different. Vue's kind of in that boat as well.
Yeah, the use of directives and like switching over to just using plain vanilla JavaScript was a bit of a learning curve for me, just because I felt like directives were just easier.
Sure, I found that a little bit of like doing React. I've only really been doing it for 4 or 5 months or something like that. Has definitely made me a better just JavaScript developer overall.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well.
No, that's good feedback. Yeah, that's probably one of the bigger differences between React and some of the other frameworks is it definitely relies more on just vanilla JavaScript. And I will say the TSX syntax kind of sometimes leaves something to be desired, but you kind of get used to it. I don't know if anyone else has any opinions on that that's used it in the past, but
you do get used to it pretty quick. It's just not. Just remember class name and HTML4 are the two big ones I think that tend to get you. And the reason is that everything's getting translated to JavaScript. So if you put the word class in there, it's going to think you're making a JavaScript ES6 class. So that's the thing to just remember.
Yeah, you're talking about like HTML. Yeah, like so that is something. Like if I were to do class here, you
class
can't.
Name.
You got to do class name. That sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, that just sucks. But it is what it is. It's a concession you need to take.
One thing I'd add, just to touch on DJ's point, I came from Angular and then Vue and then React, and so DJ, what you're thinking is perfectly normal. I thought this was all pretty stupid at first too. Like everything seems so much easier. I think though once you play with it more and kind of get used to it and get familiar with it, you will see it's not that big a deal. It's just kind of normal.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. Like, I've been going through Max's class on React, and instead of like in all the work that I've done in Awards, which is an Angular app, like in order to like output just stuff using like NG4, like whenever Max went through, doing something similar to you, John, just like putting like a few elements out on the page, like I had so much more code that I had to write in order to get that, for thing to work properly. And I don't know if this is more of a React thing or an Angular thing, just if this is just something that you should do best practice wise. But like when you guys were talking about, never directly changing the state, like you're supposed to make like a copy of it, and then once you do everything inside of that copy, then use the set state method in order to directly mutate the original array. Is that something that's specific to React that you have to do, or is that something that we should be doing in all of the different frameworks?
So I can add to that a little bit. I think that's more of just a kind of functional programming paradigm than a React paradigm.
Okay.
The idea of immutability there is kind of key. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, part of it is asynchronous programming. JavaScript is very asynchronous. So a lot of us, when we work in C# and stuff, we're not used to that really asynchronous programming paradigm. And if you do anything in pure Node, like, it's a single threaded application, like if you create a Node web server. And so everything in JavaScript tends to be asynchronous, either with callback functions, promises. So there's this, to John's point, React is designed to be very functional and declarative a little bit. So like there are, and if you do study functional languages, immutability is a huge thing, but which is why functional languages tend to be very good at like concurrency and asynchronous programming. But the thing that I think, DJ, for you is like everything that React is doing or everything that Angular is doing, it's all JavaScript in the end, right? So you have to obey by the rules of JavaScript. Now, what they're doing, like in Angular, is they put a lot of sugar coated a lot of things for you to, I mean, to kind of get around certain things, and that's why. It may seem easier because you're still learning. There's more to learn in Angular if you're doing it because you're learning all this new. Every time you learn a directive, you have to learn how that works. But React is very much JavaScript. So if you understand JavaScript or you have a good mindset of how JavaScript works from the beginning, it's probably much faster to pick up.
So is that why you guys are more partial to React? Is that because like you guys have had like an excellent understanding of JavaScript where mine's not like great. I'm still trying to learn it. That's probably why like I really liked Angular because like I guess like what's your guys' opinion on using React, because I know that you more senior developers like tend to like this a lot better. I guess I would just like to know why.
Having done a little bit of all three. Granted, I haven't done Angular in years, but having done some Vue and stuff a little bit more recently, I think and I liked Vue actually, for what that's worth. I was a pretty big fan of Vue. But I do think React has just kind of, in general, less magic going on for you. Like you have to be a little bit more in control of what's happening. And I think, DJ, like to your point there's kind of like different camps there, right? There's people that like to have that amount of control, like to be able to pick whatever libraries you want to plug into this. Like you don't even get a router for free here. You have to go add, React Router or one of the other 10 routers that exists, right? Where Angular and Vue to some extent, you kind of either do it like the Angular way or you don't really do it at all, right? Because it's like really hard to kind of eject out of that and do something else. So I think there's like some semblance of like control that folks seem to like, with something like React. I don't know if Chris, you were about to say something too, if you had something more to add to that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I talking to John and Ryan, like we all kind of didn't really like React at first when we first looked at it. So it wasn't our favorite of the three. I think but like the more you use it, the more there's like a purity to it. Like when you're using it, it's like, oh, okay. Like the learning curve seems like it's steep, but if you're not familiar with JavaScript, but once you get the JavaScript concepts, like down.
Yeah, I think that's what my problem is. Like I don't have the foundation of JavaScript like you guys might. So I can see why you guys would probably pick up on this a lot more quickly.
Well, I don't. To be fair, I don't think all of us had like super great JavaScript. Just mainly because you use jQuery a lot in .NET, and so that kind of cheats you a little bit. So there is, I think, like John said, when you work with React, it does kind of force you to kind of get better at JavaScript a little bit, and it does make you better. But and then when you couple that, like once you understand what's going on, there isn't any magic. It's very little magic, and kind of to that point with like all the extras that like Vue and I love Vue, and Angular gives you a lot of stuff out of the box. Like two-way binding, for example, in Angular, right? React doesn't have a concept of two-way binding, but you go, okay, I want to do two-way binding, but you don't really understand what two-way binding is. Like you can still do two-way binding in React, but you actually have to learn what two-way binding is, right? So basically, you're understanding.
Well, it's basically just two one-way binds, right?
Right, and so you're learning what Angular is doing under the hood. So I think when you kind of get down to stuff like that too, once you understand what's going on, you can understand why something's not working a lot better than, and it's easier to debug in the end than if.
Yeah. I think I just want more practice with it. like I need to force myself to just practice this more. So I'm still going through Max's class just to like understand like the fundamentals and whatnot. And I built my own little, React app on my local PC here just to learn how to do stuff. But if this is the way that we're going to go, like I just need to force myself to kind of get comfortable with this.
Yeah, and DJ, like as we're out, potentially another month or so out of the office and working on stuff like this, I'd like to get this little app to a point where, we can each go take a little piece of it and just kind of play with it, and then if you like it, submit a PR back into it, and we can review it and critique it, and I'll have like some good discussion in these meetings about, hey, do we like this approach? Do we like that approach? Then when we take this back into the office, we're all more or less, try to level set a little bit as far as our approach and building some of these apps.
No, I think that's a great idea.
And then the last thing I'll say about that is shout out to Ryan, I guess, for putting most of this together. But back in the office when we get there and we send out the email that was supposed to go out a couple weeks ago, but all this stuff happened. There was a good write-up in why we picked React there, right? And it kind of goes through 5 or 6 different main categories, through everything from like popularity to being able to hire people to the big corporations and ownership of it and breaking changes. And there's like, 5 or 6 really high level good points. And then each of those points were broken down into, 4 or 5 sub points as to like why React overall won that. We tried to keep a relatively impartial view when we were going through trying to select a standard.
Yeah, and one of the fun things, at least I like, is if you install the React Dev tools and you install Augury and you install the Vue.js tools, just start visiting websites and see which ones light up, because they're all grayed out until a page is using that particular library. And you will find that the majority of the websites you visit are using React. I can name a couple Vue. I can name a couple. NBA.com is Angular. AT&T TV.com is Angular. Columbia Gas is Vue. But the majority of them, if you go NFL or wherever, Amazon, Instant Video, Netflix, they're all React components. And obviously the big one, Facebook. But it's just really interesting, and also I think when you look at from a technology standpoint, like the things that kind of come out of the React ecosystem tend to come out from there. So like Redux, and Vue has its own Vuex. Angular has support for Redux. GraphQL is a Facebook thing that's come out of the whole React thing. Not to mention, you don't necessarily have to use it to do a single page application. So it does have a lot of advantages. So
that's all good discussion. DJ, when we get back in the office, I can forward that out to everybody if we're interested, or even transfer it if that's worthwhile.
No, I trust you. No, I trust you guys, and I'll totally learn it. Like I enjoy learning this kind of stuff. It's just, I was just curious what your guys' perspective was.
Yep.
The last thing that I would say would be, I can't speak for Chris or John, but not that any of us are experts, but if DJ, you, or anybody else is learning this and have any more particular questions, you can always ask me. I might not know it, but I'm more than willing to help with what I do know.
All right, awesome. I'm definitely going to hit you up then.
Same here, DJ.
Feel free. Feel free. You won't be bothering me.
Yeah, I'll definitely hit you up. Because like there are just a few things that I'm still like just a little fuzzy on, but I do want to understand this because I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and I had sent DJ the link the other day too. If you're looking for a great JavaScript resource to look things up, Mozilla has like if you go to developer.mozilla, Google it /JavaScript, you'll see all the APIs for all the different functions, like array functions, like map, reduce, for each on an array. there's very good documentation out for that. TypeScript, you can go to TypeScript's website to learn a little bit more, but you don't have to use TypeScript to do JavaScript. To do React. I mean, you can do it in pure JavaScript. They also have something in TypeScript. If you're doing, I'm sorry, not TypeScript. In React, if you're doing pure JavaScript, something called prop types, which is a form of checking on your properties that you can do. So there's different ways, and another thing is, since it is JavaScript, at some point, if with Angular, if for some reason like Google decides, kind of like what they did with Angular 1, where they kind of just like, we're just completely changing this thing, I think, React's a little bit more transparent, and it's a lot easier to change things or different libraries. Like if you start looking at web components, you'll notice like in libraries like the Polymer successor, which HTML element, you'll see that the components in there, the code looks very similar to React code. It's almost identical, like 90% identical. And so I think there's a lot of good reasons. And last I checked, and I think this is Tom's, I don't think Tom's on the call, but I think React developers are the highest paid of all the developers out there, and there's more React jobs than anything. So,
and that's what it's all about at the end of the day, right?
so a good reason to learn it. Yeah.
So if I learn React, you're saying I'm going to get a promotion?
Probably not. But
do you remember where we work? I know you've been out of the
someplace
office
else.
for a couple of days, DJ, but do you remember where we work?
No, thanks, guys. This is great.
All right, guys. So we got about 12 minutes left. I thought we're definitely not going to get into the API calling right now. We'll maybe schedule that for the next one. But I think within 5 minutes, like every time we add this, we get Chris here. I think one thing to kind of hammer home the idea of the use state is to maybe just put a simple text box where you type in the owner and then it'll show up there. So let's just do that real quick. So again, we're going to have a const and we're just going to call it owner and set owner. And we're going to have use state. And this type is just going to be a string. And we're just going to give it an empty string for its default state. And then right above this button, we'll just add an input. And type text. And I need to give it a value. And the value in this case, I'm going to set that to the owner. And I need to give it a set value, right? So that's where we're going to put in the onChange event. And I might get the syntax a little bit wrong. It's going to be onChange equals, and it's going to get an event, and that event is going to be of type change event of HTML input element. So this is again where kind of TypeScript is coming in, and we'll put an arrow function there, and we should just be able to call the set owner, and we're going to give it the event. What is it? Event dot target dot value. So that's a little goofy, and kind of to your point, maybe DJ, of like in Angular, you're not necessarily setting all that up explicitly. But what this is doing, it says on change of this input, I get the change event, which is just a basic change event with an HTML input element. From there, I get event.target.value, just like normal JavaScript. And what do I want to do? I want to set the owner to that value. So maybe right below all this for a minute, I'll just
So just to clarify, why do you have to put it on a change event? Like, couldn't we just have the input and just set set it to, whenever you click add blog, it just takes the event target value?
Yeah, you could.
Oh, okay.
You could do that.
I guess what does the on change give you?
Actually, no, you can't do that.
Oh, you can't.
Let me show this. So I'm just gonna spit out the owner at the bottom here, just like owner. So owner right now, and see as I type ABC, it's gonna show up there.
Yeah.
That's what this this on change event is doing. Otherwise, if I were to do that and I clicked add blog, well, how would I go about getting the input value? Like if I were using jQuery or something, I could, find the input value by name or by ID and grab the value of it. But that's kind of, not the, React, way of doing that. The idea here is I want the value of this to be the owner, which, like if I were to set this as some default value, you can see, that's going to be there. And then every time that I type or change this, I want to set that owner to whatever is in the text box, right?
So this is where maybe for someone like DJ, React differs from Angular Vue with React not having that native support for two-way data binding. So like in Angular, you could just do like an ng model, I think it's called, and give it value, and that way it would update. So I think what maybe would help DJ would if you comment out the on change.
Comment that out.
That value's not going to change because it's not two-way data bind like Angular.
See, I'm
actually won't even let you type.
Yep.
I think DJ's question though is why not just grab the value when you do the submit?
Right. That's at the end of the day, that is my question.
So in order
I think the answer is go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Ryan. Certainly.
I was just gonna say I think the answer to that is the value is not, there's no way to get it other than off the element. So you could do a ref or something like that if you wanted to do something more advanced, but the only way that value is being updated, is if you call the on change, and then in the add blog, he will reference that value property, but you have to update the value every time. I don't know if that's a good answer.
So that's, kind of to your point, DJ, like it's a bit more verbose at times, right? Now there are some different libraries and things that can kind of abstract some of that from you. There's like, if you're doing a lot of forms, there's this Formic library, which is pretty nice, that can kind of abstract some of that away. But like, it's very important to understand the general concept there. Once I add this back in, as I start typing, you can see that it updated that, and the owner is now.
So what you guys are saying is that in the input where you have on change.
Yep.
So if you were to comment on change and set owner, like if you were just to comment that out entirely, and then in the button, if you were to call the set owner of event.target.value, like even though you type in there, nothing's going to happen.
Right, because this event is only firing when the on change happens. I don't really have an event when I click the button for the input, right? Like all I have is this owner variable, which is just defaulted to an empty string. So if I were to, I'll put that back to John just so it's in there, right? I'm typing nothing updates. In this add blog, if I want to not have that owner, but I want that to be, that owner from up here, when I click add, I'll get John every time, but I have no way of updating that. But
I guess I'm just surprised that the input field doesn't work at all, like typing wise, like unless you have that on change in there.
Well, if I were to get rid of
I was going to say you could probably just use straight up like I don't know. You think it would work if you took the event target since it's the button, and then you just pick the sibling, or I mean, if you had an ID, you could maybe do document.get element.
That's
sure.
That's basically
right.
Yes,
what I'm getting
you could
at.
do that, but that is definitely getting away from the way that you would write a real React application.
Okay.
Yeah, the danger with that is like does that element, exist? Because then you're kind of going straight to the DOM if you do like document dot.
You're losing all the
you know.
benefits of what React is giving to you if you were to kind
Right.
of start doing something like that.
Okay.
But just to kind of finish that out, now every time I type something in here, it adds it like there. Now, one thing that you might want to do just to, in the last couple of minutes that we have here is every time I add this, well, maybe I want to wipe that out. So on add blog, after I set the blogs to that, I might also want to do just set owner back to an empty string. So then when I type in DJ add blog, it'll wipe that out. So that kind of just shows that wherever you're setting that is it applies anywhere that variable is being used.
Got it. Thanks, guys.
So I mean that's you end up writing kind of a lot of code that ends up looking like that. At least I have. So I think that's probably a good stopping point for today. I will submit a PR for this. So notice that all of the stuff that I was working on here, I didn't really commit anything as we were going. I'm actually still in master. I'll create a new branch called Add React. I'll push it out there if somebody could do the PR, and then we'll get it in there. So anybody can pull this down and kind of play with it as they want. As far as meeting again, I think like the next thing that we might want to look at is probably doing the API call to get those blogs. I think that'll kind of round out a nice real world-ish example, and then maybe add some nice UI into here. Does tomorrow work for folks if we wanted to get together to continue? Or do you want like a couple days in between, kind of gauging how frequent we want to do these?
Tomorrow's fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah, tomorrow probably wouldn't work well for me unless it's in the afternoon.
Why don't we shoot for tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah.
Why don't we do tomorrow from 2 to 4 again?
I like it.
Okay. I will. I'll send that out right after this meeting as well. And then, like I said, I'll submit that PR if somebody could briefly approve it. And then we'll get that in there as a good baseline. Anything else, guys? All right. Well, I hope you guys are finding these beneficial. I think it's some good discussion going on with this stuff. So thanks for coming.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take it easy.